Captain Sarah Chen gripped the controls of her damaged scout ship as warning lights flashed across the cockpit. The emergency landing on the unnamed planet had not gone according to plan. Her ship lay twisted among the purple vegetation of this strange world, smoke rising from the broken engines. She checked her equipment one more time. Oxygen levels were stable for now, but the planet's atmosphere was barely breathable. The gravity felt heavier than Earth normal, making every movement require extra effort. Through the cracked viewport, she could see towering crystalline structures in the distance, clearly artificial and ancient. The distress beacon was damaged beyond repair. No one knew where she was. The exploration mission had taken her far beyond charted space, following strange energy readings that had appeared on long-range sensors. Now those same readings were stronger than ever, pulsing through her instruments like a heartbeat. Sarah gathered her survival gear and stepped outside. The alien landscape stretched before her in shades of purple and gold. Two suns hung in the lavender sky, casting strange double shadows across the terrain. The crystalline structures she had seen from the ship were even more impressive up close, reaching toward the sky like frozen lightning. As she began walking toward the structures, hoping to find shelter or perhaps some clue about this world, the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate. A low humming sound filled the air, growing louder with each step. The crystalline towers started to glow with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The humming stopped suddenly. The silence that followed felt heavy and expectant. Sarah paused, her hand moving instinctively to the plasma pistol at her side. In 30 years of space exploration, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming that she was not alone. A shadow fell across her path. Sarah looked up to see a figure emerging from behind one of the crystal formations. It was tall, easily 8 feet in height, with skin that seemed to shift between silver and deep blue depending on how the light struck it. Forearms moved with fluid grace, and its face held features that were almost human but not quite. Ancient eyes regarded her with something that might have been amusement. "You crash with the subtlety of a dying star," the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in her bones. "But you walk forward instead of cowering among the wreckage." "Interesting." Sarah kept her hand near her weapon but did not draw it. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Exploration Corps. My ship was damaged during landing. I mean no harm to you or your world." The alien tilted its head, studying her with those ancient eyes. "Earth. Yes, I remember tales of that small blue world. Your species has finally learned to leave their cradle, it seems." It stepped closer, moving with a predator's confidence. "I am Zeth Kaler, last guardian of the Eternal Archive. I have stood watch over this place for 3,000 of your years." "Guardian of what?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the conversation neutral while assessing the situation. The being radiated power in a way that made her skin crawl. Every instinct told her she was facing something far beyond her ability to fight. "Knowledge," Zeth Kaler replied simply. "The records of 100 civilizations that once ruled this galaxy. Their achievements, their failures, their final moments before extinction." The alien's forearms gestured toward the crystalline structures. "All preserved here, waiting for someone worthy to claim it." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What happened to them? These civilizations? They grew too proud. Too certain of their own superiority. Zeth Kaler began walking toward the nearest crystal tower, clearly expecting Sarah to follow. They believed themselves the pinnacle of evolution, the rightful rulers of all they surveyed. And, one by one, they fell. Against her better judgment, Sarah followed. The crystal tower loomed above them, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when she looked directly at them. As they approached, a section of the wall became transparent, revealing a passage that led into the structure's heart. The first were the Caliph, Zeth Kaler said as they entered. Masters of energy manipulation. They could reshape matter with thought alone, bend space and time to their will. They conquered 1,000 worlds in the span of a single generation. The interior of the tower was vast, filled with floating crystals that pulsed with soft light. Each crystal seemed to contain swirling galaxies of information, data streams that moved too fast for human eyes to follow. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what she was seeing. What happened to them, she managed to ask. They encountered a species they deemed inferior, Seth Kaler replied, his voice taking on a darker tone. A young race from a small world, barely past their own industrial age. The Caliph decided to use them as test subjects, to see how far they could push the boundaries of genetic manipulation. A new crystal descended from the ceiling, growing larger as it approached. Within its surface, images began to form. Sarah saw sleek vessels that seemed to be made of living metal, and beings of incredible beauty wielding forces that could reshape planets. The experiment went wrong? Sarah guessed. No, Seth Kaler said, and there was something like respect in his ancient voice. The experiment went exactly as planned. The Caliph succeeded in creating the perfect slave race. Beings with enhanced intelligence, incredible adaptability, and an unbreakable will to serve. The images in the crystal shifted, showing laboratories and test chambers where creatures that looked almost human were being modified and changed. Sarah felt sick watching the casual cruelty being inflicted. But perfection has a way of finding its own path, Seth Kaler continued. The slaves learned to hide their growing intelligence. They studied their masters in secret, understanding not just the science being used on them, but the weaknesses in those who wielded it. And, when the time came, they struck with a precision that shocked the galaxy. The crystal showed scenes of rebellion. The modified beings turning against their creators with weapons and tactics the Caliph had never imagined. Cities falling, fleets burning in space, an entire civilization crumbling in the span of months. The Caliph were destroyed by their own creations? Sarah asked. Completely, Seth Kaler confirmed. And the freed slaves disappeared into the depths of space, never to be seen again. The Caliph became the first entry in this archive, their hubris preserved as a warning that none have heeded. They moved deeper into the tower, passing more crystals filled with data. Sarah realized she was walking through a graveyard of civilizations, each one a testament to intelligence gone wrong. The second civilization to fall were the Vortax, Seth Kaler said, gesturing to another cluster of crystals. They believed that strength was the only virtue that mattered. They bred themselves into living weapons, modified their bodies until they were perfect killing machines. Images flowed through the nearby crystals showing beings of incredible size and obvious power. Their bodies were armored naturally, equipped with claws and fangs that could tear through metal. Their ships were designed like weapons, built for one purpose only. They conquered through fear and brutality, Seth Kaler explained. Any species that resisted was eliminated completely. Any world that defied them was burned to ash. For 2,000 years, they ruled through terror alone. Let me guess, Sarah said grimly. They picked on the wrong species. Indeed. A small confederation of worlds that had no military might to speak of. The Vortax expected easy victory, complete conquest within days. Seth Kaler paused before another crystal, and Sarah could see the respect in his posture. Instead, they encountered something they had never faced before. The crystal showed images of the Confederation's response to the Vortax invasion. Sarah expected to see desperate defenses, last stands against impossible odds. Instead, she saw something that made her step back in shock. The Confederation had not tried to fight the Vortax with weapons. Instead, they had turned their attackers against each other. Using psychology, manipulation, and an understanding of Vortax culture that was frightening in its precision, they had sparked civil wars that tore the empire apart from within. They studied their enemies, Sarah observed, her voice filled with admiration despite herself. For generations, Seth Kaler agreed. While the Vortax saw them as weak and beneath notice, they learned everything about their future conquerors. They understood that a species built entirely on strength and dominance would be vulnerable to having that dominance questioned. The images showed Vortax fleets turning on each other, commanders assassinating their rivals, entire sectors breaking away to form their own micro-empires. Within a single year, the mighty Vortax had fractured into 100 warring factions that spent their remaining strength destroying each other. And the Confederation? Sarah asked. They watched from a distance as their enemies consumed themselves, then quietly expanded into the empty space the Vortax left behind. They built a peaceful civilization that lasted for millennia, until natural disaster finally claimed them. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease as they continued through the archive. Each story followed a similar pattern. Proud, powerful civilizations encountering seemingly weaker species, only to be destroyed by their own arrogance and underestimation of their opponents. The third to fall were the Nethys Collective, Zethkaler said, approaching another section of the tower. They believed that emotion was weakness, that pure logic was the only path to perfection. They removed all feeling from their species, creating beings of absolute rationality. The crystals here showed a civilization of cold beauty, their cities' perfect geometric forms, their citizens moving with mechanical precision. Everything was ordered, calculated, efficient to a degree that was almost painful to observe. They conquered through superior strategy, Zethkaler explained. Every move calculated centuries in advance, every variable accounted for. No species could match their tactical brilliance or their ability to predict and counter any threat. Sarah was beginning to see the pattern. Until they met someone who didn't follow the rules they understood. A nomadic species that lived in family groups scattered across space. No central government, no unified military, no logical structure to their society. The Nethys calculated that conquest would be trivial. The crystals showed the nomads' response to invasion. Sarah watched in fascination as families that had been scattered across light years began working together in ways that made no logical sense. Their tactics were chaotic, unpredictable, seemingly random. They fought with intuition, Sarah realized. With emotion and instinct that the Nethys couldn't calculate or predict. Precisely. Every time the collective thought they had found the pattern, the nomads would change it. Every strategy was countered by responses that should not have worked but did. The Nethys Collective could not comprehend how beings they considered inferior could consistently outmaneuver their perfect logic. The final images showed the collective's downfall. Frustrated by their inability to predict or counter their enemies, they had begun making increasingly desperate and illogical decisions. Their perfect system had been poisoned by the very thing they had tried to eliminate, the unpredictability of emotion and instinct. Sarah followed Zethkaler to the center of the tower, where a massive crystal hung suspended in the air. Unlike the others, this one was dark, its surface reflecting her own face back at her. And, now, Zethkaler said, turning to face her with those ancient eyes, I encounter another young species that has learned to travel between stars. Another civilization that believes itself ready to claim its place among the great powers of the galaxy. Sarah felt the weight of his words settling over her like a shroud. She understood now why he had brought her here, why he was showing her these stories. This was not education. This was a warning. What makes you think humanity will follow the same pattern, she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Because you already show the signs, Zethkaler replied. Your species speaks of manifest destiny, of bringing order to the chaos of space. You see yourselves as the inheritors of the galaxy, just as all the others did. He gestured toward the dark crystal above them. This will be your archive when the time comes. When some species you consider beneath your notice teaches you the same lesson your predecessors learned. That intelligence and power mean nothing if you do not understand what you are truly facing. Sarah looked up at the dark crystal and saw her own reflection multiplied 1,000 times. In each reflection, she could see the faces of the fallen civilizations that had come before, all united by the same expression of shocked disbelief in their final moments. What if you're wrong? She asked quietly. What if humanity is different? Zethkaler was silent for a long moment, studying her with those ancient eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of watching civilizations rise and fall. Then, Captain Sarah Chen, he said, before you die, you will learn what humans truly are. And, perhaps that knowledge will be the key to avoiding the fate of all those who came before. The crystal above them began to glow softly, waiting to record another story of pride and downfall. Sarah stared at it, wondering if she was looking at humanity's future grave marker, and realized that Zethkaler's challenge was just beginning. Sarah spent 3 days in the Crystal Tower, learning about the fallen civilizations while Zethkaler watched her every reaction. She studied the records with the intensity of someone whose species' future might depend on understanding these lessons. But, the more she learned, the more convinced she became that Zethkaler was missing something crucial about humanity. On the fourth morning, she found him standing before a new crystal formation, one that had not been there the day before. The crystal was smaller than the others, but its light was brighter, more intense. "What is this one?" Sarah asked, approaching cautiously. "The youngest entry in the archive," Zethkaler replied. "The hegemony of worlds. They fell only 50 years ago. I witnessed their destruction personally." Sarah studied the crystal, seeing images of a civilization that looked remarkably familiar. Bipedal beings not unlike humans, with technology that seemed almost contemporary to Earth's current level. What made them special? "They were the most adaptable species I had ever encountered," Zethkaler said, his voice carrying a note of old sadness. "When they faced the Calitha's energy manipulation, they developed quantum shields. When the Vortax tried to intimidate them with strength, they created powered armor that made their soldiers equal to any warrior. When the Nethys attempted to outthink them, they built artificial intelligences that could process information at unprecedented speeds." The crystal showed scenes of remarkable innovation. Sarah watched beings that looked like they could have been human cousins creating technologies that seemed like magic. Ships that could adapt their configuration in real time, weapons that learned from each battle, defensive systems that evolved to counter any threat. "They sound incredible," Sarah said. "What happened to them?" "They encountered a species called the Whisper Fleet," Zethkaler replied. "Being so primitive they had barely mastered fire. The hegemony discovered them on a small cluster of worlds, living in what could barely be called villages. Most members of the hegemony considered them a curiosity, hardly worth notice." Sarah felt a familiar chill. The pattern was repeating itself again. "The hegemony scientists wanted to study them," Zethkaler continued. "Not to exploit or harm them, but to understand how such a primitive species had survived on worlds that should have been uninhabitable. Their planets were harsh, dangerous places where most civilized beings would die within hours." The crystal showed images of the Whisper Fleet's homeworld. Sarah could see immediately why it would be considered uninhabitable. The atmosphere was thin, the weather violent and unpredictable, and massive predators roamed landscapes that seemed designed to kill anything that lived there. "The hegemony sent research teams," Zethkaler said. "Small groups, well-equipped, with the most advanced technology available. They approached peacefully, offering gifts and attempting to communicate." Sarah watched the first contact scenarios playing out in the crystal. The hegemony representatives did seem genuinely peaceful, offering tools and food to beings who lived in simple shelters and wore clothing made from animal hides. "What went wrong?" "Nothing went wrong," Zethkaler said, and his voice carried a strange note of respect. "The Whisper Fleet accepted the gifts graciously, learned the offered technologies quickly, and seemed genuinely grateful for the contact. The hegemony research team sent back reports describing them as friendly, intelligent despite their primitive conditions, and eager to learn." The crystal showed scenes of cooperation. Whisper Fleet individuals learning to use hegemony tools, while hegemony scientists documented their survival techniques and social structures. Everything appeared to be progressing smoothly. The hegemony decided to establish a permanent research station, Zethkaler continued. They wanted to study the long-term effects of introducing advanced technology to a primitive society. It was intended to be a controlled experiment in cultural development. Sarah was beginning to understand. They underestimated what they were dealing with. Completely. The Whisper Fleet had been studying the hegemony just as carefully as they were being studied. But, where the hegemony saw primitive beings learning to use advanced tools, the Whisper Fleet saw the underlying principles behind technologies that seemed like magic. The crystal's images shifted to show what the hegemony observers had missed. While some Whisper Fleet individuals were learning to operate hegemony devices, others were taking them apart, understanding how they worked at a fundamental level, and, then, rebuilding them using materials and methods available on their harsh worlds. They were reverse engineering everything, Sarah realized. Not just reverse engineering, Zethkaler corrected. They were improving upon it. The hegemony had developed their technology for comfortable, controlled environments. The Whisper fleet was adapting it for the brutal realities of their homeworld. Sarah watched in fascination as the primitive beings created versions of hegemony technology that were simpler, more robust, and often more effective than the originals. Their understanding of the principles involved had allowed them to strip away unnecessary complexity and focus on core functionality. The Hegemony Research Station sent increasingly excited reports, Zethkaler said. They believed they were witnessing unprecedented technological advancement. They documented every innovation, every breakthrough, sharing their findings with the hegemony's greatest scientists. The crystal showed scenes of celebration within the hegemony. Their researchers believed they had discovered the key to unlimited technological progress. By studying how the Whisper fleet adapted their technology, they hoped to revolutionize their own civilization. They sent more research teams, Zethkaler continued. Larger expeditions with access to even more advanced technology. The Whisper fleet welcomed them all, learned from them all, and continued to amaze the researchers with their ingenuity. Sarah was beginning to see the trap closing. How long before the hegemony realized what was really happening? 2 years, Zethkaler replied grimly. 2 years of sharing their most advanced secrets with beings they considered primitive students. By the time they understood their mistake, it was too late. The crystal's images shifted to show the Whisper fleet's true nature. What the hegemony had mistaken for primitive villages were actually sophisticated manufacturing centers, hidden beneath natural camouflage. The simple shelters concealed workshops where advanced technology was being mass-produced using methods the hegemony had never imagined. They had been building a fleet, Sarah said, watching ships rise from hidden underground facilities. The vessels were unlike anything she had ever seen, combining advanced technology with designs that seemed almost organic. Not just a fleet, Zethkaler corrected. An armada. Thousands of ships, each one incorporating the best of hegemony technology but built according to Whisper fleet principles. They were faster, more efficient, and more deadly than anything the hegemony possessed. The crystal showed the moment when the hegemony finally understood what they were facing. Research teams throughout Whisper fleet space found themselves surrounded by vessels that should not have existed, crewed by beings they had thought were their grateful students. The Whisper fleet gave the hegemony a choice, Zethkaler said. Submit to incorporation into their growing collective, or face complete annihilation. Most worlds chose submission. Those that resisted were eliminated with frightening efficiency. Sarah watched the fall of the hegemony playing out in fast-forward. World after world either joining the Whisper fleet or being destroyed by it. The most advanced civilization in the galaxy brought down not by superior technology, but by superior understanding of how to use technology. Where is the Whisper fleet now? Sarah asked. Gone, Zethkaler replied. They stayed just long enough to ensure the hegemony could never rise again, then disappeared into deep space. I have not seen or heard from them in 50 years. Sarah studied the final images in the crystal, showing empty space where the hegemony's greatest worlds had once been. They didn't want to conquer. They wanted to survive. Yes, Zethkaler said, and she could hear approval in his voice. The Whisper fleet understood something that none of the other civilizations had learned. They knew that in a galaxy full of powerful species, the only way to ensure survival was to become so formidable that no one would dare threaten them. Sarah walked around the crystal, absorbing the lesson it contained. So they let the hegemony teach them everything they needed to know, then used that knowledge to make themselves untouchable. Precisely. And now, Zethkaler said, turning those ancient eyes toward her, I have spent 4 days teaching you about every civilization that has fallen to their own arrogance. The question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? Sarah met his gaze steadily. That depends on what you really want from me. I want to understand whether your species is destined to repeat the same mistakes, or if you might be different enough to survive what is coming. What's coming? Zethkaler gestured toward the tower's entrance, where the strange double sunlight of the alien world was beginning to fade into evening. Change, Captain Chen. The galaxy is not the empty frontier your species believes it to be. There are powers out there that make the fallen civilizations in this archive look like children playing with toys. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Powers like what? The builders who created technologies that still function millions of years after their disappearance. The shepherds who consider younger species to be livestock to be managed. The silents who eliminate any civilization that grows too loud. Zethkaler began walking toward the tower's exit. And others whose names I dare not speak, lest I draw their attention to this place. Following him outside, Sarah looked up at the alien stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. And, you think humanity isn't ready for any of that? I think humanity is following the same path that led every other species to destruction, Zethkaler replied. Your explorers venture into space believing they are discovering an empty frontier. Your military prepares for conflicts with enemies they understand. Your leaders plan expansion based on the assumption that you are the most advanced species in the galaxy. Sarah considered his words as they walked back toward her damaged ship. What would you have us do? Hide? Never explore? Never grow? I would have you learn, Zethkaler said simply. Not just technology or tactics, but wisdom. The kind of wisdom that comes from understanding your place in a universe much larger and more dangerous than you imagine. They reached her ship, its twisted hull stark against the purple landscape. Sarah ran her hands over the damaged hull, thinking about the journey that had brought her here and the impossible task that seemed to lie ahead. My ship is destroyed, she said finally. Even if I wanted to carry your warning back to Earth, I have no way to do it. Zethkaler studied the wreckage for a moment, then extended one of his forearms toward the ship. The air around his hand began to shimmer, and Sarah watched in amazement as the twisted metal began to straighten and reshape itself. The technology of the Caliph, he explained as he worked. Energy manipulation at the molecular level. Your ship will be better than new when I am finished. Sarah watched her vessel being rebuilt by forces she could barely comprehend. Why are you helping me? Because I have spent 3,000 years watching civilizations destroy themselves through ignorance and pride, Zethkaler replied. Perhaps it is time to try a different approach. The repair work continued through the night, and, by morning Sarah's ship looked nothing like the wreck that had crash-landed days before. It gleamed with an inner light that spoke of technology far beyond human understanding. There is one more thing, Zethkaler said as Sarah prepared to board her transformed vessel. A gift that might help your species avoid the fate of those who came before. He handed her a small crystal, similar to those in the archive but smaller, more portable. This contains everything I have shown you, and more. The complete records of every fallen civilization, their mistakes and their final moments. Share it with your leaders, your scientists, your military commanders. Sarah accepted the crystal, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. And, if they don't listen? If they dismiss this as the fantasies of a primitive species? Then, humanity will learn the hard way what it means to face an enemy that truly understands them, Zethkaler replied. And, I will add another crystal to the archive, recording the fall of Earth and the lessons that might have saved them. Sarah climbed into her ship, the crystal secured safely in her equipment pack. As the engines came online with a sound unlike anything human technology had ever produced, she looked back at Zethkaler standing among his crystalline towers. Will I see you again? She called out through the ship's communication system. That depends, Zethkaler replied, on whether your species chooses to learn or chooses to fall. But, remember, Captain Chen, before you die, you will learn what humans truly are. The question is whether that knowledge will come in time to save them. Sarah lifted off from the alien world, carrying with her the weight of 3,000 years of accumulated wisdom and a warning that might be the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. As the crystalline towers disappeared behind her, she began composing her report, knowing that the words she chose might determine the fate of her entire species. 6 months after her return to Earth, Captain Sarah Chen stood before the Emergency Council of the United Earth Government, the crystal from Zethkaler's archive glowing softly on the table before her. The room was filled with tension as the most powerful leaders of humanity debated the implications of her discovery. The evidence is undeniable, General Morrison said, studying the holographic displays that showed the fallen civilizations. These records detail technologies far beyond our current understanding. If this guardian speaks the truth, we may be facing threats we cannot possibly comprehend. Admiral Zhang nodded grimly. Our long-range sensors have detected several anomalies that match the descriptions in these archives. Energy signatures that suggest the presence of artificial structures in previously unexplored sectors. Sarah watched the debate unfold, remembering Zethkaler's warning about humanity's tendency toward arrogance. Even faced with evidence of galactic scale powers, some of the council members were already discussing how Earth might exploit this knowledge for its own benefit. We need to accelerate our military expansion, Senator Williams declared. If there are hostile forces out there, we must be prepared to defend ourselves. The archive shows us their weaknesses. We can learn from their mistakes and avoid their fate. That's exactly the kind of thinking that destroyed every civilization in that archive, Sarah interjected, her voice cutting through the political rhetoric. Each of them believed they could study their enemies and find a way to defeat them. They all thought they were different, special, ready to succeed where others had failed. The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from the orbital defense platforms. Commander Torres appeared on the main screen, her face pale with concern. We have multiple contacts approaching Earth, she reported. 20 ships, configuration unknown, not matching any known human or theoretical alien designs. They're broadcasting on frequencies we've never encountered before. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. After months of theoretical discussion about alien contact, they were now facing the reality of it. Bring us the transmission, Admiral Zhang ordered. The communication that filled the chamber was unlike anything humanity had ever heard. It consisted of complex harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the mind. When the translation algorithms finally decoded it, the message was simple and terrifying. Greetings, children of Earth. We are the shepherds. Your species has reached the threshold of galactic awareness. The time has come for integration. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. The shepherds were one of the powers Zethkaler had warned her about, the ones who considered younger species to be livestock to be managed. Open a channel, President Chen ordered. This is President Chen of the United Earth Government. We welcome peaceful contact with your people. What do you mean by integration? The response came without delay. Integration is the natural progression of all developing species. You will be assigned territories appropriate to your current development level. Your population growth will be regulated to sustainable levels. Your technological advancement will be guided to prevent the kind of destructive tendencies that have eliminated previous civilizations. The words were delivered with the tone one might use when explaining basic facts to a child. Sarah could see the anger rising in the faces around the council table, the human reaction to being patronized and controlled. We are a free and independent species, President Chen replied, his voice tight with controlled fury. We do not require your guidance or management. Freedom is an illusion maintained by species that have not yet encountered the realities of galactic civilization, the shepherd replied. You will learn, as all others have learned. Resistance brings only suffering. Compliance brings prosperity and longevity. Sarah stood, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. May I speak with them? President Chen nodded, though his expression suggested he thought it might be futile. Shepherd Vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen. Before we discuss integration, might I ask you a question about galactic history? There was a pause before the reply came. Speak your question, small one. Are you familiar with the Whisper Fleet? The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute. When the shepherd finally responded, there was something different in their tone, a note of caution that had not been there before. Where did you encounter that name? Sarah smiled grimly. From someone who has been watching the galaxy for a very long time. Someone who warned me that powers like yours consider young species to be property to be managed. The Whisper Fleet is a cautionary tale, the shepherd replied, though they seem to be choosing their words more carefully now. A species that chose conflict over cooperation. Their fate serves as a reminder of what happens when integration is refused. Their fate? Sarah asked. According to my sources, they're still out there somewhere, having successfully resisted every attempt at domination. Another long pause. Sarah could almost feel the tension building in the space around Earth as the Shepherd vessels hung in orbit, their crews no doubt reassessing their approach to this supposedly primitive species. "Your sources are incomplete," the Shepherd finally said. "The Whisper fleet was contained through methods that required considerable sacrifice. Such measures would be unfortunate to repeat." Sarah exchanged glances with the council members, seeing understanding dawn in their faces. The Shepherds were not the all-powerful masters they pretended to be. They had limitations, fears, weaknesses just like any other species. "What if we chose a different path?" Sarah asked. "What if humanity decided to follow the example of the Whisper fleet rather than submit to integration?" "That would be inadvisable," the Shepherd replied, and now the threat was clear in their voice. "Your species lacks the technological foundation necessary for such resistance. Integration offers protection. Isolation offers only eventual extinction." General Morrison leaned forward, speaking into the communications array. "How many species have you successfully integrated over the years?" "Thousands," the Shepherd replied with obvious pride. "The galaxy is more peaceful and prosperous because of our guidance. Conflicts that once consumed entire sectors have been eliminated through proper management." "And how many species have successfully resisted integration?" The silence stretched even longer this time. Sarah could see the Shepherd struggling with how much to reveal, weighing the benefits of intimidation against the risks of showing weakness. "Resistance is ultimately futile," they finally said. "All species eventually accept the wisdom of guidance." Admiral Zhang smiled coldly. "That's not an answer to the question. How many have resisted successfully?" "The Whisper fleet remains the only species to have avoided integration through their own efforts," the Shepherd admitted reluctantly. "Their methods were unique and are not easily replicated." Sarah felt a surge of hope. If one species had found a way to remain free, perhaps humanity could as well. What made their methods unique? They understood that survival in a hostile galaxy requires adaptation beyond simple technological advancement, the Shepherd said. They developed capabilities that made the cost of forced integration prohibitively high. What kind of capabilities? Another pause, this one filled with what sounded almost like fear. The Whisper fleet learned to think like their enemies while remaining true to their own nature. They became unpredictable in ways that made them dangerous to approach. Sarah thought about the archive records she had studied, remembering how the Whisper fleet had appeared primitive while secretly developing technologies that surpassed their teachers. They had been underestimated because they had chosen to be underestimated. "Thank you for that clarification," Sarah said. "We'll need time to consider your offer of integration." "Time is a luxury that species facing galactic realities cannot afford," the Shepherd replied. "We will remain in orbit for 72 of your hours. After that period, integration will begin regardless of your decision." The communication ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. 20 alien vessels hung in Earth's sky, representing a power that could probably destroy human civilization without significant effort. Yet they had revealed weaknesses that might be exploited. "We need to contact this Guardian immediately," President Chin said. "If there's any chance of learning from the Whisper fleet's example, we have to take it." Sarah was already moving toward the door. "I'll take a fast courier ship back to his world. If I push the engines beyond safe limits, I can make the journey in 18 hours. "That's cutting it close," Admiral Zhang observed. "You'll have almost no time for discussion before you need to return." "Then, I'll have to make every minute count," Sarah replied. "General Morrison, I need you to start implementing defensive measures based on what we learned from the archive." Assume the Shepherds know everything about conventional human technology, but nothing about innovations that incorporate alien principles. "What about the fleet?" Admiral Zhang asked. "Keep them on high alert, but don't take any aggressive actions," Sarah advised. "The Shepherds are used to dealing with species that react predictably to threats. If we can make them uncertain about our capabilities, we might buy ourselves more time." As Sarah hurried toward the spaceport, she activated her personal communicator and sent a message to research teams around the world. The crystal had contained more than just historical records. Hidden within its data structure were technological principles that human scientists had been studying for months. Now it was time to see if any of those studies could be turned into practical applications. The journey back to Zethkaler's world felt like the longest 18 hours of Sarah's life. Her ship, still enhanced by the Guardian's modifications, covered distances that should have been impossible, but every minute felt precious beyond measure. When she finally landed among the crystalline towers, Zethkaler was waiting for her as if he had known she would return. "The shepherds have found Earth," Sarah said without preamble. "They want to integrate humanity into their managed civilization. We have less than 50 hours before they start the process, whether we agree or not." Zethkaler's forearms moved in what might have been a gesture of regret. "Sooner than I expected, but not entirely surprising. Your species' expansion into space has been noticed by several powers. The shepherds are among the least dangerous you might have encountered first. You said the Whisper Fleet found a way to resist them. We need to know how." "The Whisper Fleet understood a fundamental truth about galactic civilization," Zethkaler said, leading her into the archive tower. "Power is not just about technology or numbers. It is about perception and psychology." They stopped before a new crystal formation, one that glowed with a different light than all the others. Within its depths, Sarah could see images of the Whisper Fleet in their final confrontation with the shepherds. The shepherds succeeded in their integration efforts because they convinced species that resistance was futile, Zethkaler explained. They cultivated an image of overwhelming power and inevitable victory. Species submitted because they believed they had no choice. But the Whisper Fleet called that bluff? More than that. They made the cost of integration so high that the shepherds chose to leave them alone rather than pay the price of conquest. The crystal showed images of what looked like a negotiation rather than a battle. The Whisper Fleet demonstrated that they could make any victory Pyrrhic. Sarah studied the images, trying to understand what she was seeing. How did they do that? By becoming truly unpredictable. The shepherds rely on their ability to predict and control the responses of other species. When faced with beings whose actions they could not anticipate or counter, they found themselves in an impossible situation. "We don't have years to develop that kind of capability," Sarah said desperately. "We have hours." Zethkaler turned those ancient eyes toward her, and, for the first time since she had met him, she thought she saw something like hope in his expression. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "your species already possesses the capabilities you need. The question is whether you understand what you truly are." "What do you mean?" "Come," Zethkaler said, moving toward a section of the archive Sarah had never seen before. "It is time for you to learn the truth about humanity. And, perhaps, before you die, you will finally understand what your species represents in the grand scope of galactic civilization." As they moved deeper into the archive, Sarah felt the weight of time pressing down on her. Somewhere above Earth, 20 shepherd vessels waited to impose their will on humanity. In less than 50 hours, everything her species had built might be reduced to a managed reservation in someone else's empire. Unless they could find a way to prove that humanity was more dangerous to control than to leave alone. Zethkaler led Sarah to a chamber deep within the archive that she had never seen before. The walls here were not crystal but something that looked almost organic, pulsing with a soft rhythm that matched her heartbeat. At the center of the room stood a single pedestal holding a sphere of pure darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "This," Zethkaler said solemnly, "is the only record I have never shared with any species that has come seeking knowledge. It contains the truth about the galaxy's greatest mystery and humanity's potential role in its resolution." Sarah approached the dark sphere cautiously. "What mystery?" "The question of what happened to the first ones," Zethkaler replied. "The species that created technologies still functioning after millions of years, who built structures that span entire star systems, who established the fundamental laws that govern galactic civilization. They vanished without explanation, leaving behind only their works and a warning." The sphere began to glow as Sarah drew near, its surface revealing scenes of unimaginable grandeur. Cities that floated in space without visible support, machines that could reshape reality itself, beings of such advanced evolution that they seemed more like forces of nature than physical creatures. They ruled the galaxy for 10 million years, Zethkaler continued. Not through conquest or domination, but through such overwhelming technological superiority that other species naturally deferred to their judgment. They were benevolent shepherds long before the current shepherds claimed that role. Sarah watched scenes of the first ones interacting with younger species, guiding their development, protecting them from dangers they could not comprehend. It was a golden age of cooperation and growth that made current galactic civilization look primitive by comparison. What happened to them? They discovered something that changed everything, Zethkaler said, his voice heavy with ancient sorrow. A threat so profound that they chose to sacrifice themselves rather than allow it to consume the galaxy. The sphere's images shifted, showing the first one's final days. Sarah could see the fear in their advanced faces as they prepared for something terrible. Massive fleets were assembled, technologies beyond imagination were deployed, and then they disappeared, Sarah whispered, watching the sphere show empty space where the first one's greatest cities had once stood. Not disappeared, Zethkaler corrected. Transformed. They gave up their physical existence to become something else, something capable of containing the threat they had discovered. What threat? The sphere showed images that made Sarah's mind reel. Something vast and alien moving between the stars, consuming not just matter but reality itself, leaving behind voids where nothing could exist. The Devourers, Zethkaler said simply. Beings from outside our reality who feed on the fundamental forces that hold the universe together. The first ones discovered that they were coming, that no conventional defense could stop them. Sarah stared at the images of cosmic horror, trying to comprehend something that her human mind was not equipped to understand. The first ones found a way to stop them? To contain them. At the cost of their own existence, they created barriers that prevent the Devourers from fully entering our reality. But those barriers are not permanent. They require maintenance, reinforcement, constant vigilance. And that's what happened to them? They became the guardians of these barriers? The Eternal Watch, Zethkaler confirmed. Beings of pure energy and, standing guard at the edges of reality to keep the Devourers at bay. But the barriers weaken over time. Every few million years, they require renewal. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. The barriers are failing now, aren't they? The current Eternal Watch grows weak. Their energy is nearly exhausted after eons of constant vigilance. Soon, new guardians will be needed, or the Devourers will break through and consume everything that exists. The sphere showed current images of the barriers, and Sarah could see the cracks spreading through structures that spanned dimensions. The Eternal Watch, reduced to flickering shadows of their former selves, struggled to maintain their posts against forces that drained their very essence. What does this have to do with humanity? Zethkaler was silent for a long moment, studying Sarah with those ancient eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a revelation 3,000 years in the making. Every species that has achieved galactic significance has been tested by the current powers to see if they possess the qualities necessary to join the Eternal Watch. The Caliph, the Vortex, the Nethys Collective, the hegemony of worlds, all of them failed because they could not transcend their own limitations. Failed how? They were either too proud, too rigid, or too limited in their thinking to make the sacrifice necessary to protect the galaxy. The first ones knew that their successors would need to be adaptable enough to face unknowable threats, selfless enough to sacrifice everything for others, and innovative enough to find solutions where none seemed to exist. Sarah began to understand the true purpose of the archive, the real reason Zethkaler had shown her the records of fallen civilizations. You've been looking for the species capable of taking their place. For 3,000 years, I have tested every species that showed promise. All of them revealed fatal flaws that would make them unsuitable guardians. Pride, inflexibility, cruelty, short-sightedness, the very traits that made them powerful also made them unable to fulfill the role that must be filled. The sphere showed images of the various species Sarah had learned about, highlighting the moments when they had revealed their true nature. The Caliph's arrogance, the Vortax's brutality, the Nethys' coldness, the hegemony's overconfidence, all disqualifying traits for beings who would need to guard reality itself. And humanity? Zethkaler gestured toward the sphere, and new images appeared. Scenes from human history that Sarah recognized, acts of heroism and sacrifice, innovations born from desperation, impossible victories achieved through adaptability and determination. Humanity is the first species I have encountered that consistently demonstrates the opposite of every failing trait, Zethkaler said. Where others show pride, humans show humility in the face of the unknown. Where others are rigid, humans adapt to any circumstance. Where others are cruel, humans risk themselves for strangers. Sarah watched scenes of human behavior that seemed to have been selected specifically to demonstrate these qualities. Soldiers sacrificing themselves for civilians, scientists sharing discoveries freely, explorers helping their competitors in dangerous situations. But, we're primitive compared to the other species, Sarah protested. We barely have interstellar travel. How could we possibly take on the responsibilities of the first ones? Technology can be learned, Zethkaler replied. Wisdom cannot. The qualities that matter for the Eternal Watch are not technological but psychological and spiritual. The willingness to sacrifice for others. The ability to adapt to impossible circumstances. The refusal to give up even when facing certain death. The sphere showed more scenes of human behavior, and Sarah began to see the pattern. In every crisis, humans had found ways to survive and protect others that defied logical prediction. They improvised, they adapted, they refused to accept defeat even when victory seemed impossible. The Whisper Fleet succeeded because they had learned some of these same qualities, Zethkaler explained. But, they used them for their own survival, not for the protection of others. Humanity is the first species I have found that instinctively applies these qualities for the benefit of all. Sarah felt the weight of this revelation settling over her. You're saying that humanity might be the species chosen to replace the first ones? I am saying that humanity has the potential to join the Eternal Watch, Zethkaler corrected. Not to replace the first ones, but to stand with them as guardians of reality itself. But only if they can prove themselves worthy in the trials that are coming. The Shepherds. The first test. The Shepherds represent the kind of thinking that leads to stagnation and eventual failure. If humanity can resist their integration while demonstrating the qualities I have observed, they will have passed the first trial. Sarah understood now why Zethkaler had been so concerned about humanity's potential path. If we become like the fallen civilizations, we lose our chance to help defend the galaxy. Worse. If humanity fails this test, there may not be another species capable of joining the Watch before the barriers fail completely. The Devourers would consume everything, and the universe itself would cease to exist. The sphere showed images of what that ending would look like, and Sarah quickly looked away. Some horrors were too vast to contemplate directly. How do we pass the test? By being what you have always been, Zethkaler said simply. The Shepherds expect you to react like every other species they have encountered. They expect fear, anger, desperate attempts to negotiate or fight using conventional methods. If you can surprise them, if you can demonstrate that humanity cannot be easily categorized or controlled, you may force them to withdraw. Sarah thought about the time remaining before the Shepherd ultimatum expired. I need to get back to Earth. My people need to know what's really at stake. They do not need to know about the Eternal Watch, Zethkaler said firmly. That knowledge would only burden them with impossible pressure. Let them focus on being human. That may be enough. As Sarah prepared to leave the chamber, Zethkaler offered her one final gift. Take this, he said, handing her a small device that looked like crystallized starlight. If your species chooses to sacrifice themselves for others, if they demonstrate the qualities necessary for the Watch, activate this device. It will signal to powers beyond the current galactic order that humanity is ready for the greater truth. Sarah secured the device carefully, understanding that she carried more than just the fate of her species. She carried the potential future of the universe itself. The return journey to Earth took another 18 hours, but this time Sarah used the travel time to prepare. She studied everything Zethkaler had shown her, looking for patterns and strategies that might help humanity navigate the crisis ahead. When she arrived at Earth, she found the situation had grown more tense. The Shepherd vessels had moved closer to the planet, taking up positions that clearly demonstrated their ability to strike any target on the surface. More ominously, they had begun broadcasting what could only be described as integration propaganda directly to Earth's population. Sarah landed at the secure facility where the Emergency Council was in continuous session. The leaders looked exhausted, as if they had spent the last day and a half debating impossible options. "Report," President Chun ordered as soon as Sarah entered the chamber. "I have a plan," Sarah said simply. "But it requires us to do something that goes against every instinct we have as a species facing a superior enemy." "What do you propose?" Admiral Zhang asked. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the next few words might determine the fate of not just humanity, but the entire universe. "We're going to help them," she said. "The Shepherds came here believing they understood what humanity is and how we would react to their ultimatum. We're going to prove them wrong by demonstrating that humans are capable of something they never anticipated." General Morrison frowned. "Help them how?" "By solving a problem they don't even know they have," Sarah replied, thinking of the weakening barriers and the devourers waiting beyond reality's edge. "The Shepherds think they're managing the galaxy for its own good. We're going to show them that there are threats out there they're not equipped to handle, and that humanity might be the solution they never knew they needed." She activated the data crystal Zethkaler had given her, showing the council members images of galactic threats that made the Shepherds look like children. "Before we die," Sarah said, echoing Zethkaler's words, "we're going to learn what humans truly are. And we're going to make sure the galaxy learns it too." The transformation of humanity from a species facing integration to one preparing to defend reality itself was about to begin. And Sarah Chen, carrying the hopes of the universe in a device of crystallized starlight, prepared to show the Shepherds what it really meant to be human.